This Choircast podcast episode is brought to you by the Deadly Faith Podcast. Hey, heathens, I'm Lacey.
And I'm Lola.
And if you're deconstructing your faith and love true crime, then you need to subscribe to our show. On this podcast, we explore the world where religion and crime collide. We venture deep into cults, serial killers, and much more.
Now, this world isn't full of sunshine and rainbows, but it's a world that needs to be explored. We're excited to bring truth to light, so get ready for some deep dives and some funny commentary as we tell these religious true crime tales. The Deadly Faith Podcast is available wherever you listen to podcasts.
The majority of our life is lived in liminal space.
And there's this in-between space, this liminal space.
This liminality that reveals possibility.
I think we're in a liminal moment, but also in a place of transformation. We could actually change as a people.
I have great affection for the church and a troubled relationship with it.
That can't be the gospel because God said to love our neighbors.
Just to be alive in time means that we're on the threshold of the future.
Just to begin questioning is so difficult, because you have these voices in your ears telling you that you're not a real Christian.
We don't know what the future looks like. We have to work it out together.
Welcome to the Liminal Living Podcast, where we have conversations with those who are going through dark nights or deconstruction. Cynthia Beach, welcome to the Liminal Living Podcast. It's great to have you on my screen today.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Tom.
How are you doing?
I'm well.
Where are you coming from geographically? You're pretty close to me, but...
Yeah, I am between Grand Rapids and a little town of Saranac. So I live in Lowell.
Oh, yes. That's the home of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, isn't it?
I don't know, actually. We'll have to ask Dave that.
Dave knows that? Dave's been on the show. It's been a little while, but he's been on the show. He was on year 1, I think. He was episode, maybe even first 10 or maybe first 15. Wow. Yeah. That was a while ago. You're going to be episode 122, I think.
As I should be.
Of course. So I get better as I move forward, and then I got to save the better guest for later. You know?
Oh, yeah, right.
Don't tell Dave we said that, though.
I won't.
Well, I have a fun question. You're a writer. You taught creative writing for a long time as a professor. And you have these novels, you love creative writing. So my opening question is, if you could take an all-expense-paid writer's retreat anywhere in the world, where would it be? And the more important part, what drink will be on your desk?
Castle Rock, Northern Ireland. So Castle Rock, Northern Ireland is where I would go for my retreat, and I hope to be there end of summer. But I'm absolutely in love with that area. I have a novel series after I finish my sequel that I'm working on now. I have a novel series, the Seaborn series, that begins in Castle Rock and then arrives in America. So probably about 1830s, 1850s. So yes, that's where I'd go. As far as drinks, I just feel like I'm going to be a real disappointment here. I'm sorry to say, but I'm kind of not creative there. I use it all up in my writing. What can I say?
So just a glass of water?
Just probably a glass of water. But don't tell anyone, Tom.
Okay. This isn't going to be made public at all. Well, you can get a little crazy and do a wedge of lemon. How about that?
That would be my crazy. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, why did you pick Castle Rock? Have you been there and you loved it, or is it a place you've always wanted to go and so you researched and wrote about it?
I fell in love with it, and I think what I would say, Tom, is perhaps it chose me. I have ancestors who came from Ballymoney, Northern Ireland, which is nearby. I wonder if some of my ancestors were in Castle Rock area. But there is a story of an elderly man, Alfred, who was in his early 80s. And his job, probably, let's say 1850-ish, was dusting the book, the library collection of a library that is perched on a cliff, overlooks the North Sea. And it's called the Messedan Temple, It's an odd name. It was built in 1797, around there. And it's an iconic building in Ireland. And someday it may topple over into the sea. The cliff has eroded. But it was a extremely wealthy man's library. And he would burn very rare wood to keep his books dry there along the sea. And Alfred was still dusting, still working for the family, and he was no longer being paid. And I wonder sometimes, did Alfred pray? And if so, I wonder, is the story that came to me part of a prayer that Alfred made in 1850s, let's say? So I wonder that, and I wonder why I'm in love with this place, but I am.
Now, this story is one that you discovered, like
Yes.
doing research?
Yes.
Wow, I have not heard that story. What time frame is that story from? Is that from kind of the original time of the library being built?
So Alfred, I think, was living maybe in the 1850s, whereas the library was built 17, probably about 85, 97, some point there. Enormously wealthy man. His home that is nearby was probably about 3 times the cost of Buckingham Palace in the same era.
Wow.
So part of it, Tom, is the money that was coming to the British by the taking of Ireland. So that's part of my story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that is interesting. There's so much history of that area. I'd love to go explore it.
Yes.
It's one of the
I hope
areas
you do
I'd love
someday.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah, one day. I think I'll be able to make it.
Yeah.
Well, you're talking a little bit about your roots already, being from Ireland, some ancestors. What kind of soil did your life grow up out of, and how did faith play a part in that?
Yeah. I had a very different life than some of my characters, and I felt some conflictedness. I came from a fairly wealthy family. My dad was a successful dentist in California, so I was the person who had the swimming pool and my horse and a large home and so forth. So that was what I grew up in. I think part of my soil spiritually was my mom, who grew up in Huron County, the Thumb area of Michigan, very rural. She was basically a farm girl. And Mom was very devout and very deep spiritually. And I hope that's what kept me grounded in growing up in affluence. We left that area. We were in Los Gatos, which is very affluent part of California near San Jose, and settled back in Huron County. My dad was getting burned out as a dentist. And that enormous change, this happened halfway through my freshman year of high school, really stripped me of any social support. And so I really began to cultivate solitude and I think a more contemplative spirit. We lived near Lake Huron, and I would spend a great deal of time alone. And, I was imaginative. I was, already the parts of me as a writer were showing up. But it was good milk for me to have time alone and to really find, I think, the presence of God in it. And that was a enormous contribution to me, I think, to my spirituality.
What kind of faith roots would you label that if you were to slap a denomination on it or something like that?
Yeah. So I grew up Baptist, and I'm thinking what kind of Baptist was that in California? I think we were called Conservative Baptist. When we arrived in the Thumb area of Michigan, we had a difficult time finding a Baptist church, so we started to attend a Methodist church. So I started to become pretty eclectic at that point.
There's a big difference between conservative Baptists and Methodists.
Yes, it was. And even in the 70s, there was a huge difference. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when was a time when, like, the faith as you knew it as an idea didn't match what you were experiencing in life? And how did you handle that?
I had some, well, I think I'm probably a strange mix of some compliant and some oppositional. I have a stripe of that in me. And where did that come from? I'm not sure, but it probably hit when I began working for Christian organizations. And what coached me and what helped enormously was the writings of the freed slave Frederick Douglass. And he wrote well about the sharp division between the culture, the Christianity of culture, and the Christianity of Christ. And that really became a helpful category for me. I had a sharp disillusionment right after graduating from college. So I was 21, and I went to work for a ranch, and I don't want to disclose this ranch, but it was a Christian ranch who tried to witness to the visitors that came. It was cabins and the works. People would stay for a week and live the life of like cowboys. This was out west. And the owners were very well-known, big names in Christendom, but I really began to see some odd things happen. So this was one of them. I was dating a guy who was living in Michigan at that time, and he wanted to move out west, and he was in seminary. He could continue being in seminary and be closer to me. That was what he wanted. And my employer said, no, he can't move west. And that to me was just, a shocking crossing the boundary of an employer. And I told them that and soon lost my job there.
Wow.
Yeah, but it was very, very disillusioning because I didn't understand it. It didn't make sense to me. So I think that actually helped me work in Christian organizations where I didn't have the notion or didn't go, this happened and they were Christians. I just, no. We have feet of clay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've talked to many people who experience disillusionment after peeking behind the curtain, so to speak, of
yes.
Christian institutions and things.
Yes.
And then they think, well, this isn't what I thought it was, and there seems to be like an institutional persona that needs to be kept up. And then when you encounter the individuals behind the personas and they don't match, then there's this, like, what is this going on here?
Yes.
Yeah. That seems to be a major theme in a lot of people experiencing disillusionment or deconstructing from their faith.
Yeah.
Is that they don't match up. The people's, like the people that they encounter, they're not really, they're Christians in like that they say the proper things in public, but then they don't, live the value system that Christ is telling them to live, or even trying to.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's enormous. And I think what I absolutely loved about Frederick Douglass was how he as a slave watched his owner do atrocious things, including rape, right? And then on Sundays lead the service. So this is what he was dealing with, this even beyond what I've experienced, the two parts of a person. And it didn't sway him from God. And I love that. And his account, I don't know, it became a guide for me, I think. And I feel like I don't have to let the failures of another Christian talk me out of God. So, yeah.
Like, you experienced the disillusionment, and Frederick Douglass was like this anchor for you. What were some of his thoughts that helped you reconstruct a sense of I'm still in the club, kind of what are some of the main thoughts that he helped you kind of work out that kind of kept you centered, saying, I'm still in the club, I'm still here, even though I'm experiencing these disillusionments from these really, famous or big or organizations? Like, what was it about his teachings that grounded you?
Well, in part, it was this fierce list of probably adjectives that he used to define the Christianity of culture. So in his day, again, I'll say the word rape, that would be on the list, right? That was okay for the master to do, and then see no conflict with his Christianity in it. So he had this fierce list, which I'm not going to be able to recount by memory, and then compared it to Christ's list, where servant, gentle, although I believe Christ had a fierce streak as well. But just the contrast, I think naming it too, that there's this, but don't blur it with this. And so I think that alone helped me also.
Now, it can be really difficult to maintain a sense of thinking that you're in kind of the Christian sphere when it feels like the majority of people who identify as Christian are not adhering to the values of Christ, especially in the evangelical church in the West.
Yes.
It's hard not to just say, I don't adhere to the value system of this large group of people, therefore I must not belong. So Frederick Douglass is one who said the majority of these Christians are acting in these ways. Here's how that's very different from the person and work of Christ.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
One of the voices that's helped me these last few years has been Howard Thurman. And Howard Thurman had a very similar thing where he sat down with Gandhi and was talking with him. And Gandhi, he's writing, Howard Thurman was more of like Martin Luther King Jr.'s mentor.
Oh.
Like that era. But his grandma was, I think she was a freed slave. So it was that close to his experience. So he's sitting down with Gandhi, and Gandhi is saying, I understand, Christianity and all these things. I don't understand why you're a Christian, because it's the religion of the people who oppressed you. And so he then gives the response that he says that the Christianity we see expressed in these majority Christians in my country against me is not the Christianity that was in the mind of Christ.
Yes, exactly.
And I was like, oh gosh, okay, there's some hope here to redeem this thing, I think. But sometimes it's hard to feel that hope.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned Thurman. Someone who helps me these days is Walter Brueggemann. Mm-hmm. And he's a longtime theologian. You know him, I'm sure. And many of his phrases I just love and think about. One, this is new to me from, I affectionately call him Bruggy.
That's a great one. I love it. Bruggy.
Yeah. But is the whole idea of operational faith of exceptionalism. Operational faith of exceptionalism. And what I hear in that is not true faith, right? But this operational, what I do publicly to appear. And that he connects it to exceptionalism. It really struck me, partly because my growing up was I was absolutely immersed in exceptionalism, with my family's affluence and the things I got. And so to think that someone could be appearing to be a person of faith, but really just in this train track of their own exceptionalism, to me that fascinates me. It's a new phrase to me, so I'm just kind of have my shovel out and I'm digging around it. But I began to think about my novel, The Surface of Water, and began to see my two very, very different characters, my co-protagonists. I have Trish, 25-year-old Trish, who becomes a megachurch pastor's administrative assistant, and then the megachurch pastor, Pastor Goodman. And they both were harmed by exceptionalism. So Trish, growing up underprivileged, very difficult poverty, single mom, whose family, turns their back on her. And then Pastor Goodman, though, surprisingly, he knows how to play the game. He's super successful at it, but his spirit is in shards because of the game of exceptionalism, because of this operational faith instead of true faith. Yeah, I've been thinking about that, Tom, and just gnawing on it.
Yeah, that phrase is powerful. Operational faith of exceptionalism.
Yes.
That really captures a lot of what the American church has sought to become, because our roots are in, the Great Awakening and then the revivals.
Yeah.
And everything was bring the masses, convince and convert the masses, kind of an understanding of, in my doctoral work, I looked at Charles Finney a little bit. Oh. And Charles Finney was an evangelist in the 1800s that came out of the Reform movement, but the Reform movement kind of denied him and said, oh, he's really off the rails. But he was very successful because he came up with Finney's new measures, basically how to be an effective preacher to get conversions. And kind of running from his Reformed faith, the Reformed faith has that total depravity, Calvinistic understanding. And he said, well, they're not totally deprived, it's just their will. And so what we need is to help their will. And so these are the things that will help their will make a decision for Christ. And then, preaching without notes, preaching outsides or in tents and not in church buildings all the time. He's the one that kind of crafted the altar call. He had what was called the anxious bench down front.
Interesting.
And if you were feeling some kind of a anxiety within you, spiritual anxiety, you can come and sit on the bench and then everyone would pray for you while you're sitting there, but you got to come down to the front so there's all of this. Yeah. And one of the things that I noticed in his story was that he was really good at gathering the people for this big emotional thing. And then he's a circuit rider, so he moves on to another town. And then he came back around to his original towns and noticed that the majority of the people didn't keep up with it. And so he started to think well, then how can we make it a little bit more solidified? And he came up with the theology of backsliding.
Oh, interesting.
So that terminology came from Finney.
Wow.
And it was all based on his failures to discipleship when he was preaching. So he says, there's, he loved lists. So there's all these, this is what it looks like to be a backslider. If you were ever more excited about God than you are now, if you were ever praying more than you are now, if you're ever more excited about reading the Bible than you are now, you're a backslider in danger of the fires of hell. So you really need to keep on top of this.
Yeah.
So he preached this whole backsliders method. to try and keep people engaged after he had, and if you really look at it, like a lot of evangelical methodology comes out of that. Like we have to set the right tone, get the right lighting, play the right music, do the right fog machine.
Yes.
And then get people to have an emotional response. And then, then we got to keep them somehow. So we got to get them, employed in service and giving and involved. And it's like, well, this stuff works. It does work to a point, but it only brings you so far, kind of a thing, and I don't think it really encourages an authentic faith. It's more of like it gets you excited about this new thing that you've experienced.
Yeah. What sounds a little troubling is attaching shame to, if you feel this high over it and Monday you're down a little bit, that shows trouble. And I don't know, it sounds like it could easily attach shame to it instead of a quiet or contemplative expression. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I noticed that, and that kind of comes from that personas, and like your book really explores that persona of the megachurch and the success and all that. And a lot of public personas and institutions, like they depend on these curated images.
Yes.
And a lot of those curated images are falling apart. There's stories in the news all the time, prominent pastors falling because it found out that this and this. And for a while, I was like, well, of course, because they're not involved in my circles of spiritual formation and whatnot.
Yeah.
And then Jean Vanier came out as one of those people. And I thought, no, but he's one of my people. He can't do that.
Wow. Yeah.
These personas seem dangerous. They seem, and they're crumbling. And so people's faith in institutions and faith in church and faith in God are crumbling with the personas that are crumbling. Do we jettison personas, or is there a way to use personas authentically that rally people around something a little bit better? I don't know if I'm asking the question right, but just start talking and see what happens.
Well, when you said that, I felt curious about you, Tom, as a pastor, what you would say to that. I'll just say real quickly, as a prof, I was a prof for 30 years. We were taught to have a persona also as we teach. And I don't know, I think we fall into habits. What I'm thinking right now is I think we fall into habits of how we relate to people, right? When I'm out of my house. When I'm in my house, I also have patterns of relating. But yeah, what do you think about it?
In all honesty, I would say that for a long time I was terrified of success because of that.
Because of persona and feeling divided from the truth of you, your inner self?
I have been afraid of success. And then when that success demands of me to adopt a certain persona, to make it further or bigger, or like that demand is real. The temptation is real.
Yes.
And so I'm a pastor of a smaller church. We are experiencing growth, but fortunately our sanctuary only seats 100 people. So it's like there's a cap on this, and we're in a smaller town. But then you have these larger mega churches that are in suburban areas, and it's like a Walmartization of church where they're drawing all these people, and there's thousands of people, and they have all these amenities, and then they have the right shows, and they have the right, and like it's that operational faith of exceptionalism.
Yes.
Like I don't want to fall prey to that.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, like there is like good things to share. You write something, you create something, you want to give it to the people and say, I think this might be helpful.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So there's a tension, there's a line, and I'm more afraid of success than I am of failure probably as a pastor because of that. I don't want to hurt people. I don't want to fall into ego traps and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
We're taking a quick break here mid-show to let you know of an opportunity that Choir is offering. Are you deconstructing your faith? It's tough, believe me, I know, I've done it. But what if you didn't have to do it alone? Imagine having guides like Jim Palmer, Kristen Dumais, Jennifer Knapp, Brad Jerzak, Brian Zahn, Paul Young, and more by your side to help. I know I would have loved that on my journey. Well, now you can. Head on over to choiracademy.com, link will be in the show notes, and register for their Square 2 class using the promo code LIMINAL, and you will get 10% off. This course and community are designed to help you navigate your journey with wisdom and support, all because you're a fan of the Liminal Living podcast. Ministry leaders, how do you heal from the burnout, loneliness, and the relentless weight of leadership? Kaneo Center exists for you. For 5 years, Kaneo has walked with over 500 ministry leaders through their darkest seasons, offering a rare blend of compassionate coaching, therapeutically informed practices, and Jesus-centered renewal. Kaneo is launching new 24-week cohorts now, where you'll join a small group of leaders for weekly video coaching, guided curriculum, and reflections to rebuild your resilience. The cohort all ends with a retreat in Puerto Rico. As a Kaneo coach myself, I've seen how this space transforms lives. And for Liminal Living listeners, mention Liminal in your application at thecaneocenter.com/cohort to claim $100 off your cohort experience. You've poured into others, let Kaneo pour into you. If you're in a dark night or deconstruction, you know how vital it is to ground yourself in intentional practice. That's why I'm thrilled to partner with the Monk Manual, a journaling system inspired by monastic wisdom and backed by science. The Monk Manual is a daily journal companion for reflection, purpose, and aligning your actions with your deepest values. Whether you're rebuilding after deconstruction or seeking clarity in transition, this tool turns liminality into grounded growth. And now, Liminal Living listeners can save 10% on their Monk Manual using the code LIMINAL over at monkmanual.com/liminal. And remember, the wisdom of liminal spaces lies in how we journey through them. So do it with intention. And now back to our show.
Dave and I attended, I don't know if you know the name Dan Allender. He was kind of a pioneer, early writer about healing from sexual abuse. And he founded Seattle School of Theology and Psychology. Dave wanted to do his counseling master's out there, so we headed to Seattle for a few years at the turn of the century, and Dave did his degree there. I did a degree in spiritual direction. I did a certificate, and we loved it. But what Dan said that I think was grounding for us was each and every one of us, right, is full of depravity and glory. And it's like these two things we carry. And it's not one or the other, but we carry them both. As a paradigm that interests me, paradox fascinates me because it seems like it holds things better, both and instead of either or. So the paradox of I am full of depravity and I am full of glory. How shall I then live, right? How shall my megachurch pastor live when everyone in his congregation wants him to be this wise, stable person every day in his life, every minute of his life, and so forth.
And I think that when we emphasize the glory and not the depravity, like if you look at Jungian psychology, then that creates a shadow. Yeah. And then the shadow self becomes an inflated ego and the shadow and the ego both conceal the true self, if you look at it kind of that way. And when you conflate the ego, the shadow inflates as much, and then you don't know the true self. Like leading from your true self is difficult because oftentimes it's not that attractive. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But
all our sharp edges that we carry.
Yeah. And you don't want someone who's like really depraved, where you're like, I wouldn't want to emulate their faith at all.
Right.
So I think we can get caught up in definition of terms sometimes, as depravity is in like that reformed setting of, I'm a worm theology.
Oh, right.
But
right. Without the glory.
Right.
Yeah. Mago Dei.
Oh.
Yeah.
I was interviewing for a pastor position right fresh off my master's degree, probably about 13 years ago. And I sat down with this church, and I was really excited. I found this new depth to faith. I felt like I dealt with my shadow, and I just felt like a really integrated whole person with a very authentic expression and deep expression of the faith. I was just like, this is like, it just changed me so much. So I interviewed for an associate pastor position at a church. And I sat down and I answered all the questions in the whole sphere, and I experienced disillusionment there because this is a direct quote of what they said. Wow, your faith is so authentic and rich and deep, but we are looking for someone with administration gifts. And I went in thinking I can get any pastoral position because my faith is so, it's become so honed and it's deep, and I have a integrated, I was probably a little bit inflated myself, but it was new. I was excited. I was passionate. Yeah. And to sit down with a whole team of pastors, and they were like, wow, we haven't seen this kind of faith before. This is really amazing. Yeah. But we'd rather have an administrator.
Yes.
And I left kind of in shock and disillusioned. Is this true self, is this formation not worth anything in the church world anymore? Is it, or is it just more of performance and filling slots and cogs in machines and
and looking nice in a suit, or wearing the right shoes or whatever. Where would that be valued, right, Tom? That authentic faith. And I think that becomes a hard question. And I think we can get startled on the least, or shattered at the most in a moment like that. So I hear you on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And being someone on the inside of church, it's hard not to be disillusioned. I look back on a lot of church experiences I've had. Fortunately, I've landed in a really good spot. I've been here 6 years, working on my 7th, and this is something that is sustainable, and I love it. Good. But a lot of the churches that brought me to this place, I left disillusioned every time. It's... I was going over that list with a friend of mine on the way to office today, just remembering I was disillusioned here with these people, and then I moved to this church and this one's better because all these things, and then disillusioned there, and then moved and disillusioned, and over and over again. It's been difficult for me as a pastor to see the spiritually formed lives of the majority of church people and think, how long have they been here? I was a part of this, and they don't really reflect and model the life of Christ. It's more of, I'm kind of an idealist where I think, church should spiritually form people to be more like Jesus. And then you look at the majority of church-going people, and it's wait, how do you vote for this person? How do you stand for these issues? How do you...
Yes.
This is so counter to what it is. And
absolutely.
Then operational faith of exceptionalism. Oh,
I know, right?
Okay.
It helps. It's okay, they're in this little tiny train track, right? And this is where they're living. I'm going to flip this a little bit. And I just, as you were talking, I wondered, maybe we'd be doing something wrong if we don't become disillusioned. Isn't there a great quote? I'm not going to pull it up right now, but from C.S. Lewis, how God shatters our notions about God. God is the greatest iconoclast, I think is how that quote ends. But thinking about, is shattering or being deconstructed something we should avoid, or is it a signpost saying we're on the right path? Go ye forward. I'm not sure. But I feel like I want to be someone who sees things clearly, and being disillusioned, I think, is part of it. I felt like I've had a strange life at times when I encounter the secret or the dark side of somebody in a weird way that it happens again and again and again. So maybe this ranch that I worked at, and they're considered lights in the community and so forth, doing a really good work from those who aren't on their ranch, right? And close up, it was disturbing, some of the boundarylessness or whatever. And seeing secrets like that is hard. What do we do with it? But yet, I want to be able to see things as they are, or at least toward that. So yeah.
Yeah. I noticed like a lot of the vocabulary around why people hide the failures of the leaders of the institution that they're in is because they don't want to disrupt the good work that's happening.
Oh yeah, right?
You heard that with the Ravi Zacharias thing.
Absolutely.
It's like, oh, this stuff is known, but there's so much good stuff happening, so we shouldn't. And then that gets me questioning, well, is this stuff that's actually happening good? Because if you look at like the accumulated, I'm not talking about individuals, but the accumulated patterns of like Western Christianity, it's like, I wouldn't call that good.
Yeah, no.
And all of the work that these personas are accomplishing, and we're like, oh, we don't disrupt the good work, but it's like, but is it good? And this is a question. Is it really good if it keeps delivering like the accumulated mass of what we're getting out of it right now? Is it really good? I don't. And that is an open-ended question that I don't have the answer to, but I have lots of doubts around the goodness of what we're seeing.
Yeah.
Especially being a pastor on the inside of a lot of churches that have wounded me.
Yeah, absolutely. I suddenly was imagining termites. California, where I grew up, termites were a thing. Maybe not so much in Michigan, I'm not sure, but thinking about how wood is weakened in a hidden way when termites are at work, and thinking about the strength of what a church has been built with if there's termites also hard at work. So, yeah. I wonder that too. In fact, so again, Tom, I've just been noodling on that quote I told you and just walking around it, looking at it from all sides, I think. And one thought I had is sexism, is racism like this fruit of, like an ugly offspring of exceptionalism? Is that where it comes from? Like, what's beneath it? Why are we floundering so much? We seem to be going kind of backwards in these areas.
To be exceptional, you have to be better than somebody.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm talking out loud here. And so if you're going to be exceptional, your institution, your organization, like I've come to understand the way that I held theologies was probably wrong. Like the wording was probably orthodox and correct, but the way that it was in practice wasn't. So I would say Christ is the only way and the truth and the life. But how I practiced that was a Christian supremacy that says I am better than everyone because I now have the correct understanding and metaphysic of all of reality that you have to now bend your knee to.
Yes.
And that's that's a different, the way that you exercise those words then becomes a form of white supremacy or patriarchal supremacy or whatever you want to label that as. Exceptionalism has to be done at the expense of somebody because when you're exceptional, this group is not. Because if everyone's exceptional, then nobody's exceptional. So if you are exceptional, then you're doing it at the expense of somebody.
Yeah.
And in America, I think women, minorities, indigenous people have been probably the greatest victims of exceptionalism.
Yeah.
And then white men like myself have been, we still get wounded by it.
Yeah.
But not in the same ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. So thinking about what matters is my standing, right? And now you get to listen to me.
Mm-hmm. I have the right understandings.
Yeah.
I was an interim pastor for a church that had like a long-term pastor, like 30 years, retired, beloved pastor kind of a situation. So they brought me in to kind of refocus, reorient, restructure, and then lead a pastoral search process. But I had no vote in the actual search process. I was just kind of like, I will coach you, but this is your decision, and it was a very conservative church. And I did a lot of that work, restructuring, reorganizing, all that kind of stuff. And when it came time to pastoral searching, they were kind of done with the interim process. And they just found like this younger guy, and they're like, oh, young pastor, great idea. Got kids, awesome. Let's bring him in. And in the interview process, I'm like, you got to find out, like, the best question to ask a pastor coming in is, who's your favorite author or preacher? Because they're going to model their whole ideology off that person.
Wow. Yes.
And this person said John MacArthur. And I was like, oof. I was like, well, I know what kind of pastor John MacArthur is. And if he idolizes that person, then I know what kind of pastor he's probably going to turn out to be.
Yeah.
And he came and interviewed. They loved him. And we sat down with the denomination leaders and church leaders and everything. And they're like, okay, it feels like we're ready to go forward. Does anyone have any reservations? And I was in the room, and I said, I have one. And everyone looked at me, and they said, well, what is it? It was an uncomfortable moment because everyone was supposed to just go along. And I said, well, he's young. He hasn't suffered yet, and he's going to wound people with his pride.
Wow.
And I'm still connected to that church loosely, through socials and whatnot. And he indeed is doing just that.
Wow.
Very, very political, very right-wing conservative, very complimentary and harshly critical. He's more known for what he's against than what he's for. And it's just like, wow, I knew it was true, but I didn't know it was going to be like that. You know. But that thing, he hasn't suffered yet.
Yes.
So he's going to wound a lot of people. Why does suffering help leaders find authenticity, do you think? What is it about that, going through that gets us to a different place?
I think being humbled through suffering, right? It dismantles our certainty. It dismantles our exceptionalism. We now know it can happen to me. Nothing will keep me safe on that level. I will suffer. So I think it's being humbled that's so important. And, going back to exceptionalism, what we would run from with every ounce of strength we have, being humbled, is likely what we most need, perhaps,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Going through a humbling experience myself, being a former fundamentalist, prideful person, and then running into my shadow self and reconstructing life on the other side was the most traumatic thing I've ever gone through.
Wow.
But it also put me into contact with, I think, who I actually am and not who... Yeah. Like, I think we do a good job as Christians of doing impersonations of who we think we ought to be instead of really learning who we are and then, just trying to become better. And so there's a lot of persona. Even the people who aren't leaders are then putting on the persona to show up to the church building, to do the church thing.
Yeah.
And I think as a leader, if you don't have the persona so much that's built upon this, image, but you're a little bit more real and authentic, and you make space for people to be real and authentic and say, I don't know, or I have questions, or I really don't like this scripture. I'll say that quite often, actually. I don't like this scripture, but I went into it and it forced me to think differently. And here's what I found, like being able to be a little bit more real and authentic from the front then gives people permission to be a little more real and authentic. And
yes, absolutely.
I think so. Something along those lines. Because there's like narratives that you have to maintain. Communities are built around shared narratives. If you look at that, that's one of the things that's dissolving amongst Americans is we don't have a shared narrative anymore. It's like Republicans have their own narrative, Democrats have their narrative, and independents are kind of caught in between, or moderates, or whatever you want to call them. Christians have a narrative around who they are and their church is. And so there's like a shared narrative, and the leader usually is somebody who promotes or crafts or writes the narratives for the people. This is who we are. And if that narrative is not based in the reality of the lives of the people, and then you have to adopt personas to engage with the narrative to stay belonging to the place. I think that is a major flaw. Now, you being a creative writer, you're really good with narratives. How can leaders craft narratives that empower people rather than harm people or cause them to hide who they are? Like what methods would you as a writer give some leaders who are trying to craft community narratives in a healthy manner?
Listen.
Perfect. Say some more. I'm listening.
Listen. So I really worry about a leader who would try to tell the story alone, because they're missing things. They're missing voices. They have maybe even a temptation for the narrative to be X, and it's really Y, and they're the only ones who don't know it, maybe. But to listen to others, to build the story that way, what would happen?
That sounds like you can't control it.
Yeah, right? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And maybe it binds that, Tom, that desire to control it, to make it propaganda instead of truth. I don't know.
Yeah, that propaganda instead of truth. You said that water in your novels represents like plunging into the deep end of truth.
Yeah.
How does that metaphor reflect your understanding of truth versus propaganda, that the surface of the water or the image of water in your writings?
Well, we certainly want things to be a certain way. I want to be exceptional, Tom, right? And I want you to think I'm exceptional. I want your listeners to think I'm exceptional. So we certainly have that at work in us. But what does it mean if we let that go? And I think the word is surrender, right? And in fact, surrendering to the deep. What happens then? Maybe part of your shattering that you mentioned a few minutes ago of encountering your dark side, having to look at yourself square, was surrendering, going into the deep, going into the deep water. So maybe it's that. I think water also is, you said truth, it's also grace, it's also God in my novel. And it's bothers Goodman, the pastor. It bothers him whenever water's around. He's noticing it, and as a thing he lacks. So what does it mean for someone like him to finally let himself be immersed?
When I was a part of a church that was going through a restructuring process years ago, we had kind of a well-connected interim pastor that came to lead that process. And he knew a pastor who was on Outreach Magazine's top 10 fastest growing churches in America. And so he brought him in to say, we need you to critique what we're doing and give us some tips on how we can do it better. And everyone was kind of excited, like, wow, we got this very successful pastor.
Yeah.
Featured in a magazine, coming to our little country church kind of a thing. Yeah. And I was like, I'm going to really show him like what we can do. I was leading worship teams and things like that at the time. And so I did extra practice. I worked extra hard, and I went up to him after the service and I said, well, what did you think? And he pointed to one of our worship leaders and he said, he's too fat to be on stage. You need young, beautiful people on stage if you really want people to engage.
Yes.
I didn't know what to do with that statement. I was speechless in the moment. It caught me off guard.
Yeah.
And I realized, like, there's nothing about this man's faith or spirituality that I would want to emulate. And yet he's built a successful, in air quotes, a successful institution. Mm-hmm. Do you think that the success demands that people surrender pieces of their authentic self and soul over? Or do you think that it's certain personalities are gifted at building things really large?
Yeah, I wonder about the last, right? That there's a skill set that can create a mega church. And if there are gifts attached to it, what are some of the negatives attached to it also? So I start to feel skeptical about the definition of success we also have, where if I say it's a successful church, everyone would imagine a large church, most likely, right? That's busy, a busy, large church doing a lot of things. And is that successful? But we do have this notion, right, of let's ask him, and then we're shocked at the shallowness of it, the contempt for others.
But he's also correct in a way.
Yeah.
Because if you look at all of the modern worship videos of modern worship music, they follow that rule.
Yes, absolutely.
And they get the views and they get the engagement and it works.
Yeah. Well, there was a movie about the Oakland A's. Brad Pitt was in it a few years ago now, and it was how a paradigm changed in how to choose which player to bring onto your team. And one of it became about looks. So even the athletes had to be good looking. So, are we there in our culture? Apparently so. So I think of, again, the difference between cultural Christianity and the true Christianity of Christ.
Yeah. Which, by the way, I did not ask that man to not sing anymore. He was still able to sing after that.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Good.
It's like, no, we ain't doing that.
No, absolutely not.
Well, I'm noticing a rise in authoritarian takeovers of institutions and churches and governments. And, we could name names or not. We all know what this looks like. There is a conservative authoritarian takeover in our country right now in many of our public spaces.
Yes.
Colleges, churches, government, everything. You've experienced that firsthand in many different forms. So what gives you hope in the midst of such avalanche-like darkness that's happening in our society today? What gives you hope?
I get to move to Scotland.
Peace
that
out.
Gives me hope.
Yeah.
Exodus. And Exodus has opened before me, and I get to go. That gives me hope. I think we're in a very difficult time, Tom, and I'm thinking about hope. I don't think I go there immediately. I think I want to try to grapple with naming what is happening and trying to see it and not kid myself. What what helps me is I remain a fervent believer in God's tenderness toward me. For example, suddenly being invited to Scotland to be an artist in residence. I didn't see that coming, and I'm so thrilled and delighted like a kid over it. And I believe God, for whatever reason, has extended this to me. He's given it to me to do. So yeah, beyond that, I hope in the character of God, the love of God, but I don't know what to say otherwise. So this week was news about a university, a public university in Indiana University has had a similar takeover where the governor is now going to be running it. And what has been shattered is what's called shared governance at a university, and it's the faculty joining the administration to run something, because together they make a stronger team, I believe. But that is being shattered and kicked aside. So what we're seeing, I'm extremely troubled over, and yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's hard to have a sense of hope when you look at large picture things.
Yeah.
And so I try to look at more of the micro, like what's happening in my town, what's happening in my family, what's happening.
Oh, that's beautiful.
It is sufficient, but it doesn't hold the darkness away too long, because
yes,
it does feel like I'm hiding behind a boulder amidst an avalanche.
Wow. Yes.
You can't stop.
Yes.
All of this, and it seems as though the church is really excited about all of the new authoritarian takeover stuff, and
yeah,
and it's like I don't have a lot of hope for institutional Christianity in the West.
No, I don't either.
I think we're headed towards post-Christian society, which we're probably already there in practice.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people, after all this is said and done, a generation from now, I think it will have done severe damage to the cause that they were trying to advance with the authoritarian.
Agreed.
So,
I heartily agree. I think we're going to look really bad.
Mm-hmm.
We already do.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
yep.
I think history will judge that harshly.
Yes.
And there'll be a lot of people disillusioned about faith, Christianity, Jesus.
Yeah.
Because of this era we're in now. So it's really hard to have hope in that larger picture. So then I try to make my church a little microcosm of what I wish the larger thing was going to be.
Good.
And so it doesn't mean it's easy. Still feels like an avalanche, still feels hopeless.
Yes.
Like I'm trying to hold back a tsunami with a little paper cup, as that one song says.
Yeah.
But I just try to localize my actions and my vision and try to, that's what I'm doing.
Good. Dave and I wanted to create some policies. How can we stand in this time that we find ourselves living in? And one thing we really wanted to enact was kindness, and to even, like have 3 acts of kindness a day, where just very intentionally when we're out shopping or something like that, to be kind to others. And I think I hear what you're saying, Tom. Localize, do it in our realm. Maybe that's how. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I have one last question for you.
Sure.
If you could give listeners one piece of advice on the creative process, nurturing that, feeding that, expressing that, what would be your best advice for those who want to kind of nurture that creative side?
Let yourself do it.
Say more. Let yourself do it.
I think we can put our creative time, whether we want to write or do art, at the bottom of our list.
Okay.
Or, I don't know, disqualify ourselves. If I was at this level, then I'd do it. It would be real. And so I could spend a half an hour of my day writing. Let's just go with writing. But to let ourselves do it, I think, is enormous, and not worry about the end product, but to allow ourselves that play time. It's so good for us on so many levels, whether we draw or take pictures, write, cook, wherever our creativity shows up, to let ourselves do it.
I started a new practice this year where I buy like antique fans, like little pedestal fans that go on your, from like the 40s, 50s, 60s. And then I take them all apart.
Wow.
I clean them up. I re-grease and oil it, rewire sometimes, and then I sometimes even repaint, and then I put it all back together, and I have a new fan, and I call it my unspiritual practice because it's not necessarily tied to like praying, reading scripture, reflective, but there's like creativity that is being expressed in like cleaning of a fan, which is really weird to think about.
Yes. Think of the levels of symbolism in that act.
Yes,
It's something that cools us on a hot day. Cleaning,
like a restoration of something good.
Yes.
Because you buy the new ones from Walmart and the big fans, and they just fall over and they're done. Like these ones are made of metal and they're solid and they've tried and tested, and it lasted a long time. And so I got one at home I just purchased yesterday that's waiting for me. So I'm ready.
Good. I'm glad. It's also called idle brain time when you're doing something like that.
Yeah.
And it's actually good for our brains. Our brains actually have more blood flow during idle brain time than when we're focused. So it's a super healthy practice.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, on multiple levels. Idle brain time. We need it.
I've actually studied the neurology of meditation because I meditate, but I grew up fundamentalist, so I was always afraid of it. So I was like, it's just biology. It's okay. And when you get in the flow state, your brain waves slow down to what's called alpha, and you're able to connect your subconscious with your conscious mind, which is why you lose track of time when you're in the creative flow. But now I get to add to that little piece, it increases blood flow to the brain. I didn't know that part.
Yes.
So brain waves, brain function, and blood flow to the brain. And then that's why you get an epiphany while, riding the lawnmower, outside. You're like, oh, I know the answer to the solution now.
Yes.
It was always there, but your active brain couldn't get to it because it was so anxious and worried about everything. But when you slow down and you do the idle brain time, it creates a bridge between the conscious and subconscious mind so that those creative things can cross over into your mind, and then you have an epiphany. It's like, oh, now I see it. So
yes, absolutely.
Blood flow. I'm adding that to I love it. Well, cool. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really, really enjoyed our conversation. Where would you like to send folks to connect with your work?
Oh, they can visit me at cynthiabeach.com.
All right. Is there a preferred platform to buy your book?
No, it's all over.
It's all over.
It's all over the normal places. Yeah.
All right. Well, I will find a few links. I will put them down in the show notes so people can just click on it and head there.
Oh, thanks so much, Tom. A million thanks for our time today.
Yeah, and the power stayed on in these gusty winds, so I'm really happy. We captured this conversation. I'm happy. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.